There it is. That's the remnants of Centennial Church. It must have been very, very, very strong winds or a touch of a tornado to come through to rip it apart like that. And say that it was a building, but I guess in my mind it was more than that. It meant a lot more to other people also to have a place to gather.
You can see its former glory and tell that this is a magnificent building.
When you walk into it, there's a feeling. There is a feeling.
So you walk in their doors and it would come and fan out in front of you.
There's a stadium type of feel to it that was exciting for a young person.
As a child, I saw myself as being swallowed up by the magnitude of the building. And then you had this real big podium, this big pulpit.
It had that amphitheater type of feel, so the sound would spread out.
I sung in the choir. They had a young people's choir. They had an adults choir, you know.
And they had an organ put in their church that's supposed to be phenomenal.
Any song in there was amazing.
And I remember my aunt, Vernell Prophet, she used to play the organ.
That old lady didn't want to bite on that organ.
You know, you were taught to be able to recite poetry and things like that, so you had to practice somewhere. So you would practice in Centennial.
Everybody has some type of connection to Centennial, regardless of what church you go to, because it was a place where people assembled.
In the heyday of Centennial Baptist Church, Phillips County and Helena and the church were a destination for all kinds of national figures.
Muhammad Ali came when I was a younger adolescent, and he stopped by Centennial with my Uncle George, and I got a chance to meet him there.
Everybody came in that church. Everybody had programs in that church.
At one point, Centennial Baptist Church had 1,000 members on the roll.
Helena became like a citadel at the time.
And this isn't New York, this isn't Chicago, this isn't Atlanta, this is rural Arkansas. Everyone should care about the story of Centennial Baptist Church. It's a story that helps us understand who and where we are.
Centennial, to me, is the mother of all Baptist churches.
I'm fascinated by that story.
But we have so much history here, and our story is not told.
I think we have to understand how to be better stewards of our history.
I'm fascinated by that story because right now, today, the National Baptist NBC USA Inc. is the largest Black Protestant denomination in the country. That denomination traces its roots right here to Phillips County, right to Centennial Baptist Church. This is all of it. As a historian, I've learned that the most important stories often come from the places that people consider the least important. This church possesses national significance for association with its pastor, Dr. Elias Camp Morris, who led the National Baptist Convention from 1895 to 1922.
Elias Camp Morris was an institution builder. He was a leader.
E.C. Morris was an organizer.
He represented the hopes and aspirations of Black people right after emancipation.
He was born to slavery. His father was the half-brother of their master.
He becomes a Christian, and at the age of 19 years old, he's licensed as a minister.
They bounced around a bit during Reconstruction, but then found their way to Helena. And Helena was an interesting place at the time.
And so this was a southern town, and yet it was Union held in Confederate territory.
The presence of Union troops meant relative safety for former slaves. And so that's kind of why Helena took on the kind of significance that it had.
The decades following the Civil War, Black people did a lot of things with their freedom. They started schools, they ran for elected office, they start their own denominations.
He looked at the churches at that time. They needed organization and they needed structure. They had leaders that maybe did not have any type of seminary training or biblical training. They may have been called by God, but they didn't have the biblical training that they really needed to effectively lead churches. And that's what the National Black Baptist Convention did.
The fact that he was able to pull together people who didn't always agree about what was best for the African American community, Morris had their respect.
I mean, that was paramount because that was how African Americans really learned and studied and were trained on the Word of God in a systematic theology format.
And that's important because the National Baptist Convention was at the time and still is the largest black organization of any kind, religious or otherwise, in the U.S.
When you think of some of the most important religious figures in U.S. history, you might think of Billy Graham, Martin Luther King Jr., Elias Camp Morris. He's probably not on most people's list, but he needs to be.
When one was president of an organization like the National Baptist Convention, there was no denominational headquarters. So wherever the president resided, that was the de facto headquarters. So not only was Morris a pastor of Centennial Baptist Church and the president of this organization, but Helena became like the centerpiece of, the Black Baptist world.
Well, just think about it. People just coming out of slavery, the starting of Jim Crow, black church built in the late 1800s, and then you have a black architect. Can you imagine that?
Henry James Price was born in Meridian, Mississippi. Then he came to Arkansas. That's where my grandmother, there with him.
It was built by someone who was a former slave that was self-taught and from Helena.
His trade was building furniture, building beds, dressers, bookcases. He was the one that Dr. Morris had went to and asked him, could this church be built like this? He said, I'll sketch it off myself and start building.
He was said to have been trained as a professional woodworker, so it wouldn't surprise me to see such beautiful detail in the woodworking there.
Everything in that ceiling, everything, the rafters, everything that was put together was dealt with pegs, wooden pegs. They had the big chandelier with 100 lights on.
Just imagine those who built the church, the effort that it took.
Architects are kind of the unsung heroes of these types of developments.
The man taught himself to keep moving on.
It's hard to separate Centennial from E.C. Morris because the character that he had is reflected in the church too.
So when I think about the demise of Centennial, really things started crumbling because we started seeing the population begin to decline.
Folks left away from him because there were no jobs here for to come out of college to do. Everybody don't want to be no policeman.
But compounded on that, you also had the Elaine Massacre.
The year 1919, and particularly that summer, is referred to as the Red Summer. The black communities are under attack. So the Elaine Massacre story is about black labor and black autonomy. However, when plantation owners find out that the men are secretly meeting, the plantation owners decide that they will do something about this. This violence that occurs leads to the arrest of the members of that union. But the violence doesn't stop merely with their arrest. As news gets out that there is fighting in Phillips County and a possible insurrection, men from neighboring towns come in with guns and begin shooting everything that they can see.
When the Elaine Massacre occurred, there wasn't a black woman, man, or child who wasn't directly impacted.
So my great Aunt Mariah, she was married to one of the Johnsons. They were brutally murdered and basically shoved in a ditch.
The Elaine Massacre gives you another great reason for why Centennial was so important.
E.C. Morris was a mitigator, and he was one that the white population had asked to basically speak to the black people and try to corral them together and get them together.
Amid all of Reverend Morris's prodigious gifts and skills, he would have been considered by many as a moderate. In fact, Booker T. Washington and E.C. Morris were very good friends. And so it was the idea that if black people demonstrated excellence in everything, then white people would respect them and eventually integration could occur over time.
Morris seemed to have strong relationships with white Southerners. From the outside looking in, it looks as if those folks are just giving in to the racism and segregation of the day, but it's also an opportunity to make alliances with the devil that you know.
But the complication began to happen when as E.C. Morris began to work and he began to tell the African Americans, hey, settle down and follow the rules. And he began to see as they continued to follow the rules, it wasn't changing things. I think that even E.C. Morris in some ways may have become disillusioned.
And so here's Elias Camp Morris, who for all this time has been thinking he's been cultivating these relationships with white people so that in times of crisis like this, he would have allies, only to come to find that white people close ranks with each other in support of white supremacy and the Jim Crow order.
In several of his writings, he talks about it and how basically racism itself was so illogical and they were never going to come to logic because of their racism.
And so you can imagine for a pastor, the heavy weight of trying to minister to this very large congregation who justifiably and understandably is absolutely outraged.
E.C. Morris dies a few years after the massacre. He was not an old man.
You could be as unoffensive as possible to the white community, but the rage of the mob can still sweep you up and crush you.
Oh, now this is cool. Okay, sermon by E.C. Morris. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. His life was one continuous conflict against the powers of sin and was filled with troubles, some of which were almost unto death. And yet those troubles seemed to increase the joy of his great heart. The visual of Phillips County, when you've never been here before, is kind of overwhelming. A lot of the homes have been abandoned and are crumbling. Interestingly, I think that residential reality is actually reflected in the churches as well. And yet, this incredible history resides just in this one county, let alone the Delta.
There was so much pride in maintaining it from a group of people who probably did not have nearly the amount of resources, advantages that we probably have now.
You cannot build nothing on fish, dinners, and chicken. I say, y'all can't put up no church with no hamburgers and hot dogs. That day is gone. But the committee that they had, at that time, they're not living now. They done passed on. A lot of them passed on,
I do feel like I'm of the generation, and I take accountability for it, that let the ball drop, right? We got distracted. And when I see it, that's what hurts. It hurts that we couldn't be visionary enough to be able to say, we need to catch this before it gets to this point.
If we can't build it now, what does it say about us as society?
The first thing we'd like to see is that it become a national park. We believe that's the responsibility of our country because of the history of E.C. Morris and the contributions that he made to the Baptist Convention and to the community and culture as a whole.
We have sites, places where great things happen, and we don't want to forget them. And society shouldn't forget them, from where a person comes from.
This is where Centennial Church was. This is where Centennial Church was built.
That was one of the things that you were always told, don't forget where you came from.
History is so important. It's a tricky thing, right? It's something that is happening, but you don't realize how important it is until after it's happened.
The other thing is, we think that the community itself, we have a responsibility.
It's a site of all kinds of important religious history in the country. That's some of the history and significance we need to recover.
This is a monument that's where you come in and learn.
It's a story about race relations. It's a story about Black self-help and empowerment and uplift.
So running the race, doing your job, and passing the baton on to future generations is what I think Centennial Baptist Church represents as a monument.
I think the reason that we really should rebuild it is to give homage.
Especially starting off with the National Black Baptist Convention. I think they have a responsibility. And then when you look at the other Baptist faiths that emerged from it, I think they collectively also have some responsibility. It's part of their history. Centennial was a home.
If you can work together, then that'll show the next generation to work together.
It was seen as sort of a beacon of Black excellence.
When we went through history where it didn't seem too fair, we had to have somebody to hold you to the course, something to hold you to the course. That's what Centennial stands for.
The excellence and the capability of the African American community never surprises me because I know it's there and I've seen it happen.
I see no reason why Christians in particular wouldn't immediately create a fund to financially support the complete restoration of Centennial Baptist Church, both as a place of worship and as a museum. Oh my gosh, check this out. Oh, this is it. This is actual Cornerstone. Centennial Baptist Church, Moses Prophet, July 4th, 1876. 1876.